And now, please welcome to the stage from Corelight, James Lagerman.
Good afternoon. I almost said good morning, but good afternoon. My name is James Lagerman. I'm the Director of Technical Alliances at Corelight, and today I want to talk to you guys about something that I spend a lot of time with doing and talking to customers and other partners and vendors, and that's operationalizing cyber threat intelligence. It's more than what a lot of people actually think about. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that SOCs face, a little bit about what Mandiant did last year with their new threat score. Are anybody familiar with Mandiant's new threat score that they announced last year, or actually at the beginning of this year? We'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk a little bit about where to actually place this and how you can do it. The majority of the time I'm going to spend on this slide here, because this is really the 6 key steps that I think are important when it comes to operationalizing cyber threat intelligence. Because it's the process of systematically integrating and leveraging threat intelligence within your organization. The purpose is to enhance your threat detections, prevention, and response capabilities. And that's kind of long-winded and much simpler. It's about taking the threat information and making it actionable within your organization's daily operations. If it's not actionable, then it's just information. So the first step we want to talk about is sourcing that. You have to have a good source for that. You want to gather threat intelligence from various information. You're probably not going to have a single source that's going to cover everything you need. Whether this is OSINT, some open source intelligence, commercial threat feeds like Google Threat Intel, Mandiant Advantage Threat Intel, CrowdStrike's Falcon X, Proofpoint. There's internal data, blog posts that you might get. We deal with a lot of government agencies, and they actually have a collection of threat intel that they make themselves just by listening to and watching all these other bulletins and blog posts that they're doing. The bottom line is the source needs to be relevant to your environment and needs to have a good understanding of the threats that you're going to be facing. And this is one of the most important things, is the analysis and tuning of this. Once you've collected all of this, it's critical to analyze and understand the relevance and credibility of that intelligence to your environment. A failure in this step could actually lead to missed detections, overwhelming noise in your environment, alert fatigue, even excess resource consumption on your network sensors. If you don't see the traffic, it causes, if you have overutilization of resources, you're dropping traffic, and if you don't see it, how can you identify the threats? However, tuning's not just about the intelligence itself. It's also about the configuring of these security tools. If, for example, you are using Suricata rules and you don't configure the home net address, all of the signatures and IOCs that you're going to load on your network, you're not going to get detections. It's going to lead to false negatives. Your device is not properly configured. Or if you partially configure it and it doesn't have all of the other address groups configured, you're going to get a lot of false positives because you have the wrong address groups configured. So that's getting into a little bit of the technical weeds, but proper configuration of these tools is really important to avoid false negatives and false positives. It's also really important to create tuning lists like ignore lists, vulnerability scanners. If you don't tune out your environment, so if you don't take all the vulnerability scanners out of that with the ignore list, that's more false positives. Your analysts can only deal with so many alerts in a day. That's the kind of stuff that leads to alert fatigue. We also want to reduce duplicate types of IOCs. For example, if you're listing hashes in your environment, you don't want to list MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256 for the same hash. That's just going to be duplicate information. That's going to be a burden on your devices, and it's going to overload them, again, potentially leading to drop traffic and missed detections because you don't see the traffic. Bottom line is that too many alerts, if it's not tuned properly, are going to be the same as no alerts. Let's take a look at Target from back in November of 2013. I'm sure everybody in here, you might be not that familiar with it, but you've heard about this from 11 years ago, where cyber criminals were able to steal 40 million credit and debit card records, and the 70 million customer records. The interesting part about that is Target had the right threat intel loaded. They had it in the right place in their security ecosystem, and they were getting alerts for everything. But the attackers chose to strike during one of the busiest times of the year where the security teams would most likely be distracted by other alerts. And that's exactly what happened. They had everything loaded, but it wasn't tuned properly. And that was just one more contribution to the breach. So bottom line there is don't be a target, pun intended. So the next step we want to talk about is integration. Integrating the relevant into your tools and your processes is the next pretty important step. While you're choosing where you're going to put this, what tools you're going to load it on, network sensors, NDR sensors like what CoreLight provides, are one of the best locations. If you have threat intelligence that has to see live packets, that's where that threat intelligence needs to be. If you want to use that threat intelligence to make a decision about, hey, if we see this alert, capture all the packets, you have to do that on the network sensor. But the reality is network sensors have limited resources. They don't have as much memory or as much data or as much storage as, say, a SIEM does that's running in the cloud or running on a much bigger database. So we recommend that you prioritize that high priority critical threat intelligence needs to be actually on the network sensors, where everything else can be, or even all of your threat intelligence can actually be in the SIEM. That way you're going to get the real-time high alerts coming directly from that at the point of observation. Then the next step is going to be disseminating that. Who are you going to share this information with? If you guys seen the press release earlier this year, CoreLight actually, we had our Series E funding, raised over 150 million. We actually had to turn away investors because so many people were wanting to invest in CoreLight. Well, that made us a target. So our CISO was disseminating information to all of the CoreLight employees about potential threats and targets that we were, keeping us aware of the latest threats against our company, specifically because we were in the news and we had just raised so much money. Disseminating the current threats against your organization. While you're not going to share everything with everybody, it's really important that you disseminate that. And then a step that's generally overlooked is automating all this. There's no way you can manually keep your security tools up to date if there's no automation in place. If you look at Mandiant Threat Intel, if you query for their threat intel, every 15 minutes, you're going to get new threat indicators. You're going to get updated scores on those threat indicators. If you're looking at Suricata rules like from ET Pro, you might see 3 or 4 times a day, you're going to get new Suricata rules or updates to that. No human is going to sit there every 15 minutes and go manually pull down your threat indicators and then push them out to all your security tools. That has to be automated. You have to be able to tie this into your operational workflow. And then the last step is going to be that feedback loop. Do it all again. You're going to learn from this. It's not a download all this information, apply it, and then you're set. You're constantly iterating on this and evolving this. The most important step that we talked about, though, was that analysis, that tuning. That is, if you fail at this step, you might as well not even have your threat intel loaded. So some of the things that we're talking about, I don't know if you guys seen this report that Mandiant released last year. There was their global perspectives on threat intelligence. Next couple slides, I'm going to talk about some of the data that we actually got from this and some of the importance of threat intelligence. But this report interviewed 1,350 different business and IT leaders who make security decisions for organizations of at least 1,000 employees. The respondents were based across 13 countries in 3 regions with 18 sectors, including financial services, healthcare, and government. Some of the key things from this is, not surprisingly, 96% of security decision makers believe that it's the importance of to understand which cyber actors are targeting you is critical. However, 67% of those believe that their senior leadership underestimates the cyber threat to their organization. So here's the real challenge. Despite the near universal understanding of the importance of acquiring information on threat actors, 96% say they're perfectly happy and they're satisfied with the quality of that threat intel. 79% say they make most of their decisions without insights on who could be targeting the organization. It's critically important that we have it, but we don't actually use it. And only 35% say their organization has a comprehensive understanding about the different threat groups that are targeting them. So it's really important that we have it, but we're not using it. If you look at overwhelming, alert fatigue, North American respondents were most at risk of burnout. And when you look at the individual verticals, government was actually most likely to feel overwhelmed. So here's the biggest challenges out of this. While information overload was clearly one of the top challenges for almost every organization, nearly half of the respondents said applying the threat intelligence was one of their biggest challenges. And 38% of them said knowing what to do was one of their biggest challenges. So that's really what we're talking about here is, what do you do with this? How do you actually effectively apply threat intelligence? There's so much out there. And then what do you actually do with all of that information? Google and Mandiant, now part of Google, have been making great strides over the last year, 2 years to really help customers understand how to effectively apply that. There's a lot of information on here. This is a screenshot from the Google Threat Intel interface. If you're a customer of that, you're familiar with this. But what I want to focus on is what's in that top left corner up there. Now the Google Threat Intel score, they actually give you a confidence score, an opinion score that includes not just the verdict, but the severity. On a scale of 0 to 100, how important, how critical is this threat intel and how severe is it? This is really important. This is actually a combination of VirusTotal, Mandiant Advantage, and a couple other factors thrown into an algorithm where they come up with this. But I want to spend a little bit more on the underlying Google threat score that they actually released. So let's compare the traditional confidence score. A lot of vendors have this, but this is actually coming from Mandiant Advantage confidence score that they had before the threat intel, comparing that to the new threat score, not just the confidence score. So a confidence score was, how confident are we that this indicator is an indication of malicious traffic? On a scale of 0 to 100% confident, your high confidence score is 70 or above. Generally, when I'm dealing with a confidence score, I stick to 80% or above. So it's still not even all of the high confidence. But when you start to look at what a threat score is, the confidence score did not take any consideration of the risk that was there. How severe is this? So, okay, you have a CVE that maybe there's a memory leak on an application. You download, you've got some endpoint detection, whether it's Tenable or CrowdStrike or any other one out there, and they say you have this CVE on there. Well, it's because you have Wireshark installed on your laptop, and it's this version with this OS. There's a CVE that's related to that, but it's not exposed to the network. That I don't need to be alerted about that because somebody tried to attempt a CVE exploit against this machine. It's not the severity of something actually happening to that. It's not there. Confidence scores don't take in the severity or the risk that's involved. The threat scores actually do. The threat scores are actually, they can be derived from humans looking at them, and they can also be derived from a bunch of ML. And when you also look at that threat score in the Mandiant Advantage portal, it would tell you, how did they come up with that? Is this benign or is it malicious? Was it an ML detection that determined it's malicious, or was it a human analyst? All of that's right there in the score. So I want to take this a little bit farther and really drive this home about reducing noise. If you take 30 days of indicators of confidence scores of 80 or greater, you get over 1 million indicators. This is Mandiant Advantage threat scores. About 1,030,000 indicators. If you take the same data set and apply a threat score of 40 or higher, and if you look at the definitions there, 40 or higher is where they're saying, hey, this is suspicious, somebody needs to investigate it. 60 or higher is, hey, this is an alert, stop what you're doing, somebody prioritize an investigation on this. A 40 or higher, the same data set, it's about 56,000 indicators. That is a huge reduction in noise for all of your threat tools. All of your analysts no longer have to look at the almost 1 million indicators. That could be millions of alerts that you were getting that were just noise to your environment. And this is some of the changes and the improvements that Mandiant's been making to their threat intelligence. And all of these are now fed up into the Google threat score. So now the last thing I want to talk about is, where do we put this? How do we prioritize what threat intel goes where? This is a really important step, as I mentioned before. So if we look at a traditional investigation, a traditional placement where all of your threat intel is in the SIEM, you have something like CoreLight sensors sitting on the network that does not have the threat intel on there. There are still metadata, there's still some detections that are on there, but we didn't load the threat intelligence on there. We're basically sending these metadata logs and alerts to a SIEM. The SIEM is then going to process that after the fact, apply all of the, Google SecOps. It's a great platform. You're going to get a lot of alerts, but that takes time for that to process. You get the alert, the analyst reviews it, and they make the decision, are they going to escalate it or are they going to close it? Is it something they got to work at? When we talk about moving to the left, if we load that threat intel on the actual sensor, now we don't have to wait for the SIEM to actually post-process that and correlate it and do that. These critical alerts, you collapse things down to the left. So when we talk about going left to boom, we're trying to reduce that time to the respond, that MTTR, that mean time to response. Simply loading that critical threat intel on the sensor, not only does it reduce that time to get the alert, now the analyst can make their review faster, they get a quicker notice. You can also then trigger additional things to happen at the network layer, at the point of observation, where the critical information is actually at. If you need to record packets, if you need to trigger something else, if it's a detection that says, hey, I just saw this traffic, and then followed by this traffic and this traffic, that threat intel needs to be on the sensor because the SIEM will never be able to see those packets in that order. So bottom line, where you actually put this is really important, and the network sensors are a critical place to have that really important, high critical threat intel needs to be loaded. With that, thank you for your time.